be seen as being in the middle class, you have to have certain things. If you have an office job, then you're seen as well-to-do. Things that we consider standard in the West are actually luxuries in Ghana. So the illusion is that the middle class is doing pretty well for themselves. Like when you come to Ghana, you can live this amazing lifestyle. It's a smoke screen. Like Ghana has this huge smoke screen. So, there's a lot of social pressure to keep up appearances. It's so easy to fall into poverty in Ghana. If you can book a flight and come to Ghana, the chances are that you're not in poverty. And by the way, you can live for $500 a month if you're a single person. You absolutely can. Like, only your loved ones will go there because ain't no one going to visit you in that place where you live. I can't do poverty in Ghana, so we head back to the West. That's what we do. Hey guys, welcome back. Okay. Today's video, I want to talk about classism, okay? Now, every country has its different classes of people. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I moved to Ghana was that at the time, that was back in 2014, there wasn't really a middle class. Like, there was a middle class, but it didn't really exist in Ghana. It wasn't as prominent as the different levels of, the rich and then the poor. Like the middle class wasn't as obvious during that time, but I feel like over the last 10 years or so, the middle class is definitely coming up. And if you're a business owner, actually, that's who you should be focusing on, because I feel like the middle class is growing quite rapidly in Ghana. But hey, that's just a little thought for you there. But yeah, today's video, I wanted to talk about the middle class in Ghana and what the impact is. Okay. So today I just really want to talk about the middle class and what that means for Ghanaians, okay? And obviously those of us in the diaspora that are trying to move to Ghana or do live in Ghana, where do we fall in the bracket of classism? For Ghanaians, I would say that in order to be seen as being in the middle class, you have to have certain things, right? This is assumed. I guess we could put this, pretty much, this is probably across the board, right? Middle class, you have a good job, you have a car, you have a home, you have these things that make you a good person in society, of good standing, should I say, in society, right? Now that definitely applies to Ghana, all those things, but Ghana has its challenges when it comes to that, okay? So in Ghana, one of the things is if you have a job, if it's an office job, that is pretty much better than any other job. That's just kind of like how it's seen, surface level, right? If you have an office job, then you're seen as well-to-do. I mean, you can run your own business, that's great. But if you're talking about in the work field, if you have some type of office job, like you work in a bank, anything like that, right? You're seen to be well-to-do. That's pretty much all it is. Like, you don't need a whole lot more to be classed as the middle class. Even if your bank account doesn't necessarily reflect it, it's not necessarily always about your bank account. It does have an element to it, but it's not just about what is reflected in your bank account. It's more about the social status that you have that people can see with their natural eyes, right? So like I said, job, you may own a car, you have a nice house, whether that's rented or you own it. You just have these nice things. You have access to things that poor people wouldn't necessarily have, right? So obviously you have, you have on-tap internet. Now, internet is classed as a luxury in Ghana. A lot of people in Ghana, when it comes to internet, you know what they do? If they turn on their internet data and then they turn it off when they don't need it. So you can set, so if they need to send a message to someone, they'll send the message and then they'll turn the data off afterwards and they'll go back and check so that the data is not running. Like, data is a huge thing for people, like being able to have free access to the internet, whereas we in the West wouldn't necessarily consider that being a luxury. It is a luxury for a lot of people in Ghana. Like, things that we consider standard in the West are actually luxuries in Ghana. So internet, like you have internet, you have running water, you have electricity, that makes you good. Like, you are good if you have those things. Now, for the middle class people are able to access some of those things that poor people would struggle with, right? So we know that the infrastructure of Ghana is not great. So your electricity, you're going to get light off at some point. Now, if you can afford solar or a generator or something that gives you some type of backup power if the lights go off, then you're doing pretty well for yourself. Do you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people don't have access to that. That is that is like above par. If you have some type of backup power, that is above par. Okay. If you have means of buying water when the water is not flowing in the house, right? You have a poly tank, but you have means of buying water, you're doing pretty well for yourself. If you have, again, internet access all the time, you're doing pretty well for yourself. Now, this is the illusion. So the illusion is that the middle class is doing pretty well for themselves. But in actual fact, the middle class is actually struggling. When you take a deeper look into the middle class, so I would even go as far as saying like there's almost 2 tiers of middle class, right? So there is a lower middle class and then you have a higher middle class. Now the lower middle class, I would say, is a paycheck away from being broke. That's what I would say the lower middle class is, right? So what I mean by that is if they were to have a medical emergency, it would pretty much wipe away their savings, right? Because you know in Ghana, most things you have to pay for. And if anything like that happens, their savings is gone. When it comes to school fees, they have their children in school, but it's still a struggle. They still have to find money somehow to make sure they get those ends to meet. They're able to put their children into, a decent kind of school. In Ghana, if you're able to put your children into school, right, you're doing pretty well for yourself. And I'm not talking about one of these Saito schools. What I mean by Saito schools is like one of these local government type schools, right? I'm talking about a school that you have to pay for every term or every month or however you pay for it, right? If you're able to keep that up, especially if you have multiple children, you are doing well for yourself. You're doing pretty good. Now, when it comes to having a car, right? So a lot of the middle class may own a car, but trying to put petrol in that thing is it's tough. It is not easy. So you're talking about, so the thing is that it looks great on the surface. On the surface, some of these middle class people look like they're doing well, but the reality is that a lot of them are struggling behind the scenes, right? So they're struggling with, they're sending their children to school, rent is due, okay, they may have paid, okay, I've paid my rent for 1 year, okay, so I'm good for 1 year. Now when it comes to having to renew that rent, really do they have the funds to be able to just renew? They may not have the funds accessible in their bank account. They're gonna have to do something to make sure, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to scramble and do something in order to get this money, whether I'm gonna have to have some type of side business, I'm gonna have to do some extra work somewhere or something to be able to pay my rent again this month. It's not a thing where it's just generated every month. So for those of us in the West, right, say you have a job, you earn $3,000 a month, right? Out of that $3,000, that's gonna cover you're gonna cover your rent, it's gonna cover your bills, it's gonna cover all the things that you need it to cover, right? Just hypothetically speaking. In Ghana, it doesn't necessarily work like that. Okay, so someone may earn 3,000 cedis, right? Which is a pretty decent salary for Ghana. But in that 3,000 cedis, can they afford to pay rent out of that as well? For a lot of people, not necessarily, okay? That will stretch to their day-to-day lifestyle, right? So day-to-day stuff, they can put a little bit of money in their pocket, if they have to go out with friends, do a little bit of fuel for their car, shopping, that kind of thing. But it doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily that they can allocate a chunk of that to their rent, because rent in Ghana is very expensive. For the local person, it is actually expensive, right? Because even if you find a place for, let's say something reasonable, 1,000 cedis a month, and that is, for a lot of us, 1,000 cedis a month rent is like, that's average. I'm stuttering. That's kind of average, right? But for most people, if they're looking at rents, they're looking at, I'm talking about from the diaspora, they're probably like 3,000 to 5,000 cedis maybe. Something like around that would be like something very, I don't want to say use the word subpar, I can't think of a better word, something pretty average, pretty standard, right? So now we're talking about finding somewhere that's perhaps maybe 1,000 cedis. Now, if you're earning 3,000, you're going to take 1,000 out for your rent and then 2,000 to live off. Food, I mean, if you have kids, think about it, the maths doesn't maths, right? So therefore it's an illusion. These middle class people, it's an illusion that they're doing well, they're well to do. Whereas in the West, if you think of a middle class person, you feel like, okay, well, they're sorted, they may not have a huge amount of savings, but they're month to month, they're kind of good. They may live paycheck to paycheck, but they're pretty much good. They may have a small amount of savings, they're good. They may even have car payments in whatever they're, but they're still middle class. That doesn't work in Ghana. In Ghana, everything is outright. For example, car payments. What car payments? You buy your car outright. So if you own a car, that's why I sometimes say that basically everything in Ghana you pay for upfront. So in some respects, Ghanaians are richer because we don't have the ability to have access to credit like in the same way that we do in the West, right? And so it's a little bit different. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much. The soft life is very, very expensive. So for most people, when you think of middle class, you feel like they can afford certain things, right? Now, I'm not talking about overly priced things, but they can afford certain things, like maybe you could go out to eat a couple of times in a month, won't break the bank, you're good, that kind of thing. But for a lot of middle class people, they can't even do that. You see, social media portrays things in a certain way. Like when you come to Ghana, you can live this amazing lifestyle. You can decide, oh, today I'm just going to wake up. I'm going to go and have breakfast at Kempinski Hotel. I'm going to go to Movenpick. I'm going to swim. It's all false, right? That is not reality for a lot of people, especially for the middle class. Even like the rich, they may do stuff like that, but that's not just necessarily the life that they live. It's a smoke screen. Like Ghana has this huge smoke screen about this luxury lifestyle that people have, and it's really not true. And it like the elites maybe have access to a lot of that stuff, but for the middle class person, they can't do it. They are still struggling with certain things. It's not easy for them to be able to keep up with things like that, right? So if you're talking about having access to luxuries, like we're talking about imported foods. So certain things, like how are you going to put cereal in your house? Do you know how much a box of cereal is in Ghana here? Like one box of cornflakes can cost you 150 cedis, which is, what's 150 cedis now? We're talking, I'm going to say about, that's like $10 for a bag of cereal. Like it's ridiculous. And I'm even being generous in what I'm saying. Sometimes it's closer to 200, and that's the truth. So not to mention that you have to add milk, yeah? So, you know what I'm saying? It's like things that we would consider in the West standard are not standard. So you're talking about imported goods. How many people who are living on a 3,000 cedi paycheck can have access to buy those things on a daily basis for their children? They cannot do it, even for themselves. Even if you're single and you have 3,000 cedis, you're still going to struggle to do those things. There's the things that you do to treat yourself once in a while. Now, we may think buying a box of cereal, how's that a treat? That isn't going to be a treat for a lot of middle class people, because that's what that is going to be special to them, because they're going to take a chunk of money out of their income in order to purchase that. It's not a like just turn up at the shop and just fill your trolley type thing. When I was in the UK, and I used to go food shopping, you just pick up the cereal, I'd pick up the milk, I'd pick up certain things, and you don't really think of them as luxuries because you just buy them because you need to stock up your cupboard. But in Ghana, you're not going to open the cupboard and find a box of cereal in there like that. You're not going to find certain things because those things are luxuries. You're not going to necessarily have wine on tap. You're not going to have these things that we associate as being luxuries or soft life, or however you want to put it. It's not going to happen that way. Once Ghana is so superficial that once you are seen in a certain way, right, it comes with a certain level of respect, a certain level of stature. And so once you get that, you do not want to fall below it. With everything within all your might, you do not want to fall anything below that when it comes to living in Ghana, right? So, there's a lot of social pressure to keep up appearances. So, in fact, that's actually a very dangerous place to be when it comes to the middle class, right? Because you want people to see you that, you're doing well for yourself. People, I was going to say happy for you, not always happy for you. But, you're doing well for yourself. You have a certain level of respect with people in your community, with your family, with your friends, all that good stuff. You have all that. But secretly, you're actually struggling because it's not as easy as what people think, right? People who expect you to be able to afford holidays. How do you afford a holiday on a 3,000 cedi income? And I'm telling you, 3,000 cedis is not bad. Even if I said 5,000 cedis, how do you afford a holiday on generating 5,000 cedis in a month? How do you manage to save along with all your other other things that you have to pay for. Let's not even talk about utilities, healthcare. Healthcare is not free in Ghana. If you get sick, you have to pay for it. You have to have money, pots of money away for certain things. And so that's why I'm saying that there almost is like two sets of middle class. There's the lower middle class and the higher middle class. The higher middle class may have been able to have some pots of money away for certain things. So if they get sick, they have a pot of money where they know that, okay, this is what I'm going to use for this. They're able to perhaps have money in a pot for their school fees, to cover their school fees, or they know what they're going to do to be able to get that. But the lower middle class may not have a plan for those things yet. So if anything happened, they have lost their middle class status. They've gone down into poverty. It's so quick. It's so easy to fall into poverty in Ghana. The things that you have to battle financially make it very easy for you to be in the poverty category. The middle class category is so very, very small. The poverty category is huge, and so is the rich. I'm not even talking about the elite. The rich people that are well-to-do, people that can say, hey, I want to buy a plot of land in Cantonment. I'm going to build my house next month. I'm going to start building my house. Those things there, that's what I'm talking about. Those are the two major categories. The middle class is a category which is now being stretched, especially with more of the diaspora coming back now. There is definitely more of a middle class, because when the diaspora moves to Ghana, they're not necessarily poor, but they're not necessarily rich either. They're kind of somewhere in between. Now, when we talk about the diaspora being middle class, right, I'm saying I believe that the diaspora is mainly in the middle class category. Obviously, you're going to get a few people that are rich, that are doing pretty well for themselves. I'm not necessarily talking about those people. And I wouldn't put the diaspora in the the poor category either, right? Because I feel like if you can book a flight and come to Ghana, the chances are that you're not in poverty. You have some means or access to funds to be able to get you there. And once you have access to funds like that, I wouldn't put you in the category of being poor, right? So for the most part, I would say that most diaspora people are in the middle class. Now, when the diaspora comes to Ghana, when they start to live in Ghana full time, that's a different experience to them coming on holiday. So a lot of people, when they come on holiday, they come to Ghana, right? You could say that they're rich, right? Because they come with their foreign currency, right? So they have a lot more buying power. They can do a lot more things. And this is what social media captures, right? So the social media captures diaspora eating at fancy hotels, doing all these fancy, amazing things, and it seems like the diaspora is rich. That's what it seems like, right? But you're talking about people who are coming and are on social media that are showing their 2-week holiday, their 1-month holiday in Ghana. They've come to spend the money. That's the difference. They've come to spend the money. They haven't come to say, okay, well, I've got some money in my pocket, but I'm not trying to spend it like that. They've not come to live a reality. They're on holiday. Same way as us when we go to, I don't know, Spain, Portugal, wherever, any of these places, we go with the intention to spend money. Like, okay, I've got like $2,000 in my pocket. I'm going to spend it in 2 weeks because that's what I've saved for. This is me enjoying myself. And so you do all the fun things, all the luxury things, right? So it's the same thing in Ghana. People come and they want to do these luxury things, these fun things, and that's what people are seeing on social media, and people think that they can have that lifestyle when they come. But the reality is that when you come to Ghana, yes, you're still middle class, but you cannot spend in the same way that you spend when you're on holiday there. And so therefore your lifestyle is going to be different. You're dealing with challenges. When you're on holiday, you don't have to deal with ECG. You've rented someone's place who's probably made it comfortable for you, so you have some type of backup power, right? But you by yourself now, you've moved to Ghana, and you think that you're going to live the lifestyle that you lived when you were on holiday. No, because who's giving you your backup power? Even if you have backup power, you're likely paying for it from whoever it is that you've rented a house from, or however you've done it, right? You're going to have other expenses that you didn't have. And so it's a false lifestyle when you see a lot of diasporans initially move to Ghana. Let's talk about initially moving to Ghana. When you initially move to Ghana, you think, hey, I'm good. You look at your currency conversion, you're like, oh, I can afford to do this and that. It doesn't take long before reality hits in. right? And when reality kicks in, then you kind of start to see to yourself that, you know what, actually things in Ghana are kind of expensive. Eating out every day, it is kind of expensive. You start to see the reality of what it really is to live in Ghana. And then that's why I said, for the most part, most people will fall into the middle class category. So although they can afford certain luxuries, they can afford to eat out every now and again, they can't, it's not they don't have throwaway money for eating out. It's like at some point that stuff is going to start to add up. You're going to start to notice it in your bank account that, hey, my money's going down. Whatever savings it is that you came with, you'll start to notice those funds going down very, very quickly. You know, there's things that you have to do to establish yourself when you come to Ghana. And so your money drains very quickly. So you could come with a bulk sum of money and think, hey, I'm going to be good. But that money goes down extremely quickly in ways that you wouldn't even have expected. Things that you have to pay for that you really haven't accounted for. You come to Ghana and you think, okay, well, I can live on $500. I'm going to be good. I know it. I can do it. Especially when you first land, the expense of your initial outgoings are going to be a lot until you start to understand the system and see where your cards kind of fall. Then you have a better understanding of how much you can live on. And by the way, you can live on $500 a month if you're a single person. You absolutely can. Even if you have a child, you can still live off $500 a month, I'm telling you. You know, some of the local people may view the diaspora as being like upper class, rich, right? But as I've said, the reality is not true. A lot of us, we know where we came from. We know the lifestyle that we were living in the West. And for a lot of us, we were not living outlandish lifestyles. You know, we're managing what we have. Even if you have had this big, amazing house and you had all these luxuries, you had a car and all that stuff, right? That's great. But when you look at how much of that stuff you own, do you really own it? You're still paying for your car, you're still paying a mortgage, you're still paying for those things. A lot of Ghanaians, you know, they own, whether it is a tiny house or whatever, they own these things. And so really, I just want you to have an understanding that who the middle class of Ghana is, but it's definitely a growing community within Ghana, because there was a stage that even when it came to homes, right? A lot of middle class people. How many middle class people can afford to buy homes? Now you'd think that in the West that's normal. What do you mean you can't buy a home? Like you can't, like you may struggle, but you have easy access to a mortgage, right? You don't necessarily have easy access to getting a mortgage here if you're middle class. It doesn't work like that. And so it makes it difficult for middle class people in Ghana to have certain things unless they have the purchasing power to buy it outright. Okay, so I think it's even kind of unfair to compare. You can't compare middle class in the West to middle class in Ghana. They are two different things. I would say the middle class in Ghana is probably in alignment with people that are poor in the West. Can I say that? I don't know. Let me know if you agree with that. I feel like that's more of an accurate description if I say that. The reason that I'm saying that those two kind of compare is that in Ghana, you know, the middle class may not always have access to stable electricity. You know, they may live they may live in a house that's pretty decent, but the road to their house is terrible. It's, you know, down some chaka sideways somewhere where they live, you know. But I mean, they're still doing all right for themselves. That's middle class. But if you took that same scenario and put it in the West, that may be looked at as that person's living in poverty, because who's going to live there type thing, you know. And so anyway, I don't want to get too lost inside it, but basically that's it. The middle class is definitely a growing society in Ghana. And at a stage, middle class people couldn't even get on the property ladder. It was hard for them. And so that's where you saw, or where you see now, you see a lot more properties coming up, right, which are trying to cater to the middle class, whether that's this diaspora middle class or Ghanaian who are pretty well to do. Okay, so now you're seeing apartments that start at like $100,000. Now $100,000 is a lot of money. Let's not get it wrong, that is a lot of money. But before, those those options were not there. You couldn't even get $100,000 unless it's somewhere in the sticks, somewhere that no one wants to go to. Like, only your loved ones will go there, because ain't no one going to visit you in that place where you live, you know. And so now, that's what I'm saying, there is a market being created for the middle class people to make them more comfortable. We are trying to look at more affordable options so that the middle class can have a bit more of a better social standing, okay? Be a little bit more on their feet. The middle class is definitely there. They're definitely emerging now within the classes of Ghana, but they still have there is still a way to go. And until better systems are created so that these middle class people can get a better foothold, then they are going to continue on that same path where, you know, if they can't maintain this thing, they are going to slip into being poverty very, very, very quickly. It's easy to happen, you know. For the diaspora, not so much, because when we feel that that's happening, you know, we head back. We're like, I can't do poverty in Ghana, so we head back to the West. That's what we do. But for Ghanaians, you know, they don't have that choice. That's where they live. So if they slip into poverty, it's a real problem. Well, yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Do you have anything to add to what I've said? I'd love to hear it. Okay, if you are thinking about moving to Ghana and you would like to have a one-to-one consultation with me, you can send me an email to dela@moretodela.com and we can arrange something from there. The Diaspora Hub is also open if you have a business in Ghana and you would like to list your business on the Diaspora Hub. The link is in the description box. You're free to do that. Okay, that's the end of today's video. If you have anything you would like me to discuss, leave me a comment in the comment section and I'll do my best to do that. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Don't forget to also like, comment and share this video. Until next time, I'm out.